Добрый вечер всем на Рабкоре. С вами Калиновская. И сегодня у нас совершенно особенный стрим, потому что сегодня у нас в эфире дебаты. Будем обсуждать реформы политические в Аргентине и будем говорить о шокирующих последствиях первого полугода правления президента Хавьера Милея. И говорить мы будем ни с кем иным, как с лидером либертарианской мысли Михаилом Световым, а также лидером рабочей партии Аргентины Гишермо Кейном. Добрый вечер.
Добрый вечер. Всем привет, уважаемые товарищи зрители Рабкора.
Hi, Гишермо. Happy to have you here.
Well, happy to be invited. Thank you very much for the invitation to the team at Rabkor and Mikhail as well for participating in the debate and all that will be watching us live and I'm sure afterwards as well.
Сегодня у нас формат с вами экспериментальный, поэтому вести дебаты мы будем в основном на английском языке, и скоро на него переключимся. Перед этим хотели бы всей редакции Рабкора поблагодарить иммигрантский коллектив Partido Obrero за помощь в организации сегодняшних дебатов. Мы приветствуем любые вопросы от аудитории. Можете задавать их сегодня на русском, можете задавать на английском, каком угодно. Я буду их переводить на английский. Now we'll switch to English once again. So, hello everybody. You're listening to Rabkor, and where we talk here about the social democracy, political context, and societal changes. And my name is Kalinovskaya, and let me tell you, we have a very special broadcast today, because right now on the stream today, we have a debate. We'll talk about the consequences of the first 6 months of the reign of the president Havьера Milei, and we'll talk with, on one side of the political coordinates, with Mihai Svetov, who is a libertarian thought leader and also recognized by Russian authorities as a foreign agent, who will talk in the support of Havьera Milei's reforms. And on the other side of the political coordinates, we have today Gишермо Кейн, a member of the Worker Party of Argentina, a deputy of the Chamber of Deputies of the province of Buэнos-Ayres, and one of the organizers, actually, of the protests against Milei's reforms. Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Hi,
Gишермо, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise, and as I said, thanks. And I'm sorry I have to participate in English. Unlike my great-grandparents who were from near Kiev and Odessa, I speak neither Ukrainian nor Russian, but I'm glad to be able to have the debate with you. And I like hearing these words, рабочие, and so many words that we know from our revolutionary literature.
Yeah, absolutely. It stands for workers' correspondence, actually, right? So it's like supporting the rights of the workers. And we're very happy to share our platform with all of you today. Let me do a brief introduction for our viewers. So Havьera Milei has been, to say the least, a controversial figure in the Argentinian politics. He won the election against the general background of the very unsuccessful results of the socialist opponent, as you say. He did not have the strong support in the government, less than 10% of the seats. He's known to be like a very bright personality in the media and plays with the public opinions with his radical statements. His political program is very much based on the opposition of the socialist past and the program of the previous president, right? And a month ago, more than 1 million people protested in Argentina against radical cuts in education funding pursued by, as we call it, anarcho-capitalist reforms. As professors say, with the electricity costs rising nearly 500% every month, this has brought the universities to their knees. Milei has announced that he has achieved a budget surplus for the first time in 12 years in Argentina. Argentina has also set an anti-record in poverty levels over the past 20 years. And 50% of the population in the country right now does not have enough money to eat, actually. However, the country is with its constantly falling currency exchange rate, the price of the peso has risen against the dollar by 25%, which is greater than the increase in all other currencies in the world, actually. So at the same time, industrial production in the country is in decline. All the reforms proposed by Javier Milei has been called in general in the media like shock therapy. More than 300 reforms were proposed at once, including, for example, reduction of the number of the ministries in half, abortion ban, mandatory cryptocurrency registration and control, less investments in infrastructure, the regulation of prices, and many, many more. And this being said, we'll recap on all this 6 months of this politics today. And let me introduce like a brief structure for today's debate. Each one of you will have up to 10 minutes to present your position with no interruption, to get your points, to describe like your general background and how you see the current situation. And afterwards, we'll move to the discussion part, where you have to like come up with like up to 3 questions to each other and like have a discussion. And afterwards, we'll move to the questions part. I have some questions in general for what's your view on the current situation specifically, but we'll also have the block for the questions from the viewers as well. Hopefully, we'll do it like less than 2 hours. All right. So this being said, I'll be happy to give you the floor, and I would like to give the mic first to Mihai Svetov, who is generally like a supporter of the reforms.
Okay, I'd actually prefer for Gишermo to have a first turn because he's local and he would present his position more clearly, but I'm fine starting as well. So first of all, I want to address some of the points that you made, and you called Javier Milei controversial, which I think is an example of left-wing media framing a certain person as a controversial figure when he's actually when his opinions are rather mainstream. Like Lula da Silva is a convicted was convicted of grand corruption, but he's not controversial in your words. Communist president of Gabriel Boric of Chile is never controversial, but Javier Milei for some reason is, even though he was never convicted of anything remotely that can be remotely be considered controversial. So that's just a point for about manipulation and framing, which I disagree with. Anyway, first of all, I'd like to say that many of the problems of the Argentinian economy that you mentioned were not created by the Milei administration because he's only been in power for less than 6 months, or I think it's been 6 months recently. So inflation in Argentina started long before Milei came to power, and it actually one of the reasons why he mustered popular support is because inflation was getting out of hands. And in 2019, for example, inflation in Argentina reached 136%. And it's true that one of his rallying points were getting rid of Argentinian peso to disarm the government, to take away the power to print money from the government, which also led to an increased level of distrust to Argentinian peso. But that's kind of the point. If the president declares that he's getting rid of the national currency, it's only natural that it will boost the inflation. But it's not the problem that was created by the Milei government. It's the problem that existed long before he even announced his plan to run for the presidency. The same goes for many other points that you mentioned about deindustrialization of Argentina. It's not something that can happen in 6 months. That's something that has been happening in Argentina for many, many years. And it's a shame that the state of Argentinian economy is a shame today because there is no good explanation that a country with a high index of human capital, the country of vast natural resource, should be in such a poor economic state. It's and it's a result of the left-wing government mismanaging the country, depressing the individual initiative, and actually making it impossible to run any kind of business initiative from Argentina, which is why, for example, a lot of businesses base themselves in the neighboring Uruguay, because business climate there is so much better. And it's much easier to install yourself in Uruguay to do your business in Argentina. For example, Mercado Libre, which is Amazon of Latin America, is based in Uruguay and not in Argentina, precisely because the economic climate there is much better. So this what brought Milei to power. And when you embark on criticizing his first 6 months, and I actually have a lot of criticism for him as well, because I think it's impossible to reach the kind of objectives that he set out for himself using the kind of means and the kind of working from within the system, so to speak. But it's a kind of a trap of democracy, so to speak, because you can run as a non-systemic candidate. You can say a lot of revolutionary things, but if you bind yourself to working within the democratic system, you actually are unable to realize most of your reforms. You're unable to realize most of your objectives from working within the system, from working systemically. And I think that will be the downfall of the Milei administration, that is not going to be able to realize what he set out to do, because he hasn't been revolutionary enough for it to work out. And I think this idea is very well understood by the left-leaning audience, because you yourself constantly use this argument, is that that's why you need a revolution, because working from within the system, you only strengthen the system. I, as libertarian, think the same thing, that you can't do libertarian reforms working from within the democratic system, because system works against you, and because you are bound by the institutions, but the same institutions that you set yourself out to reform. So yeah, that's my and my final point is that there's a reason why Havьер Милей, being a radical being a radical that he is, has been elected in Argentina. And the reason is Argentina is disillusioned with the kind of left-leaning reforms and the left-leaning governments that has been in power in Argentina for the past decades. People want a radical change, and that's what Havьер Милей has promised. My major complaint to him is that he's not delivering the kind of radical change that he promised during his presidential campaign, and that will be his downfall. But the fact that the reforms themselves are not the problem. The problem is that he's still trying to work within the system that is impossible to reform. So my question, I guess, to Gишермо is why does he think popular opinion has swayed so much to the right that Argentina became the first country to elect a libertarian president, which is unprecedented. I don't think anyone expected it 2 years ago. So there has to be deep-rooted reasons. And being a left-wing politician himself, and having observed left-leaning governments in Argentina, he should have some explanation why left-wing politics in Argentina failed so spectacularly that a majority of Argentinian people supported libertarian candidate. I'd love to know his interpretation and his opinion on that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mikhail. Very well versed. I would just say that, like, we start with the affirmation part first, then we switch to the critical part second, right? So I'll be happy to give floors to Gишermo Кейном right now. You have up to 10 minutes to present your position here.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. No problem with answering Mikhail's question, because frankly, I think it is a good opportunity to set the record straight on some of the affirmations that he made, and also some of the things Kali said in the introduction that I think would need to be addressed, because the analysis of governments or political parties as left or right is not a scientific method at all. I understand that it's a shorthand that we often use, but at least as a Marxist, what we try to apply, or what we understand as a scientific method, is what are the class interests being defended by each group. I do not think that any of the governments Argentina have been leftist, and much less socialist. They don't even describe themselves as socialist. The Peronist movement, for example, which is one of the parties, the main parties of the coalition, which governed under Nestor Kirchner, Cristina Kirchner, and Alberto Fernandez, is a government which is the political force states its center as the defense of bourgeois nationalism, which is the completely opposed to a working class internationalist point of view. And this is not a theoretical difference, but it is a practical one. Our party, the organizations we militate in, have been in the opposition against bourgeois nationalist governments in Argentina, and also, for example, right-wing governments that have recently held power, like the Macri government, which was in office from 2015 to 2019, which is loosely a part of the parliamentary support that Milei has now, for example, and called support for him in the runoff elections. So this presentation of a socialist government, of decades of governments of leftism, is not historically correct. And on the other hand, these bourgeois progressive governments that in this, for example, in the Latin American region, have either more center-left presentations or sometimes more nationalist presentations, as the governments of Chavez, of Lula, and so on, at least from our point of view, do not represent the interests of the working class, and we reject that they're being identified as socialist or communist or anything. Milei uses these terms very liberally. He calls everybody a socialist. For example, the person who was mayor of the city of Buenos-Ayres, Rodríguez Larreta, who was how can I explain this? A more democratic wing of the Macri party, more linked to the Democratic Party of the USA, for example. He calls a socialist when it's a center-right politician. So it has very much been a campaign to try to link these failed bourgeois governments to the idea of socialism, which is scientifically inaccurate and a political fallacy. So just, I think, and I definitely agree that Milei's rise to power, as also the rise in popularity of many ultra-right politicians with different political coordinates, some that stem historically from fascism, some that stem historically from more nationalist leanings, but your Trumps, your Bolsonaros, your Vox, Le Pen. We have this international club of right-wing or ultra-right-wing politicians who have gained electoral prominence and who Milei also relates himself with. He was recently at this Congress of fascistoid organizations in Spain, for example, and they have a relation with each other, and they are all exploiting similar failures of bourgeois progressive governments, which in Argentina is very much the case. Our country has been rising in poverty, in inflation, and the industry has been going down for decades. This is a fact, an indisputed fact. None of this economic crisis has started with Milei, but he has been able to make a big demagogical campaign that he was going to go against the system. But this is the other point I want to dispute. Milei is no anarcho-capitalist. He is an extreme liberal, an extreme bourgeois liberal. He is just, for example, made in the government house here a bronze statue of President Carlos Menem, a Peronist governor, a Peronist president from the 90s, who was the Argentinian analog of Ronald Reagan or Margaret Thatcher. Another politician, Margaret Thatcher, who Milei declares himself to be an admirer of. We have had anarchists in Argentina. I don't agree with anarchism, but they were heroic organizers of the working class movement in Argentina, and they fought against the state. Milei does not defend the individual against the state. He defends police repression. He defends even advancement against the freedom of organization in unions or in social movements. He defends the dictatorship of the bourgeois state against the workers, even on points of individual freedoms. For example, abortion or women's rights. He favors the positions of the churches and religion against individual rights. So I see, frankly, no serious point of calling him any sort of anarchist or libertarian. He is a right-wing, liberal bourgeois politician. Now, onto his 6 months of government. So once we clarified these general coordinates of the debate, his 6 months of government have been a leap in the social and economic disaster of Argentina, which, as we said, is of course pre-existing. But the pre-existing disaster has to do with the systematic foreign debt, with the IMF austerity policy, which both under the Macri and the Alberto Fernandez governments had advanced very strongly. First thing Milei did when he came to power was 100% devaluation of the peso, which had huge, the result of a huge inflation. But it is not, as Michael said, that this inflation is a problem that is pre-existing and is something that he somehow an undesired subproduct of the situation. Milei has been very clear that the liquidation of wages, the reduction of real wages through inflation has been a part of his policy. He has said he wants people to have to use the dollars they have saved under their beds. He has said this publicly. This is no secret. So what they have done is a jump in the fall of the real wages in Argentina to try to destroy the value of labor in Argentina, and think that this will open up new economic opportunities. The reforms he has presented in Congress or through a decree in 3 consecutive attempts, none of which have been fruitful to this point, and a big political crisis. Even the bourgeoisie itself, which is interested in labor reforms, does not agree with giving Milei the sort of personal power, despotic personal power and martial law that he has sought in these laws, which again shows how far Havьер Милей is from any presentation of freedom, libertarianism, or anarchism. What he wants is a martial state where he can declare martial law, where protests are forbidden, as his minister, who was with the previous Macri government as well, Patricia Bullrich, has forbidden street demonstrations. And what they want is union labor contracts to cease existing in the way that they have in Argentina, and to have labor contracts company by company, for example, as they mostly are in the United States, to deregulate labor conquest or labor hard-won labor conditions that the working class movement has won over many years, and which these both center-left and right-wing governments in the past few decades have been eroding through promoting many forms of precarious labor outside of union contracts in the country, and has taken over half of our workforce outside of union conditions. So these few months have been a disaster. They've already been a 10% reduction of the gross national product. So we're heading into already with 6 months into a depression of Argentine economy under Milei. Construction of new buildings has fallen 40%. Industry has fallen over 20%. There have been over 100,000 layoffs, both in the private and public sectors. And we have 3 million 3 million Argentine people who have fallen under the poverty line. These are the immediate results of Javier's shock attack against the conditions of the Argentine working class and oppressed peoples. And even though he has not been able to get his more extreme reforms voted in Congress, this balance sheet speaks for itself. Trickle-down economics is a scam. It is not true that if we get some very concentrated monopolies to be very successful in gathering income, this will make the general conditions of the Argentine people, or any other people for that matter, rise. So Milei is traveling around the world and offering to auction off the natural resources of our country, he was very happy to say Elon Musk wants to buy off lithium in the north of the country. But we have a big problem. Either lithium, of course, is a strategic resource, as are others in our country. Agricultural products, oil, water, as Pentagon officers who are building bases offered by Milei in the south of the country have recently remarked. But if we do not industrialize, manufacture in Argentina these products, none of the wealth they generate will be remain. So selling off commodities in the international market and not industrializing the country is what the Argentine bourgeoisie has done for over 100 years and has led to a failed state. If we auction off lithium and buy the batteries from China, the US, or anybody else, Argentina will be in the same condition. And Milei is offering no new situation in this regard. So I think I've been able to present a general situation, at least of how I am seeing the Argentine situation right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Gишermo. I think we have like the landscape very well described right now of where we're at. So we now can switch to the next part and start with a discussion. So you both have like 3 questions to each other and have like a free form discussion.
All right. So am I the first one to ask the question then?
Yeah, for sure. I think we can just pass the mic right now.
Okay. So just again, a quick comment. In a typical Marxist manner, Gишermo presented the interests of the union, equated interests of the unions to the interests of the individuals, which I think cannot be further from the truth in case of Argentina, because when he talks about precarious labor outside union contracts, what he actually means is basically talking about preventing people from finding employment without union explicit approval. That's the opposite of the individual freedom. That's the opposite of entrepreneurship and the freedom of employment, which I think was one of the main reasons why industry is in Argentina is in such a poor state, is because there is no labor competition and there's no freedom of entrepreneurship that would allow Argentinian industry to grow. So just wanted to highlight that point because I think that was very important. And I wish Gишermo was right, but unfortunately, I think 6 months of Milei government has not been a leap in anything. He's basically been struggling to do something, and that's part of the reason why instead of staying inside the country and working on his reforms, he's actually traveling and visiting conferences outside of Argentina, which I think is a very fair point of criticism, and I think is a sign that Milei is not achieving what he wanted in Argentina, and instead concentrates on promoting himself outside of Argentina, which is a very fair point of criticism. I agree with. Talking about strategic resources, they are only strategic if you're resources are only strategic if you have capacity of using them for industry, which Argentina at the moment has not. And I think it's a very much a wishful thinking, imagining that out of the blue there will appear an Argentinian Starlink or Argentinian Tesla or Argentinian whatever Ford, who will be able to utilize this vast lithium reserves in the north to promote domestic to promote domestic industry. That's not how economy works, and unfortunately, Argentina lost its opportunity to build up its own industry precisely because precisely because unions had so much power, and precisely because unions depressed the local economy and depressed the production, industrial production in Argentina. So the question that the Argentinian government has to answer, and I hope Gишermo will answer as well. what economic conditions has to be met for industry to flourish in Argentina, so the local industry can take care of local strategic resources? And that's the question that left is very reluctant to answer, because you have to have a competitive advantage at something. The reason why China industrialized so fast is because they had cheap labor that they were willing to exploit, that they were willing to bet on to build the industry that in turn advance the economy to such a level that they are now capable of using their own strategic resources to advance industry even further. Right now, there's not a single economical advantage that Argentina is willing to exploit to put itself on the map. That's what Havьером Милеем is hopefully is going to change, but I doubt he will, because in the past 6 months he barely did anything. But from everything I've heard from Gишермо, I haven't heard a single answer. What needs to be done for Argentina to advance its economy? Because keeping things as they were, or using Marxist terminology, increasing power of unions is the way back from industrialization, because you have to attract capital, you have to attract entrepreneurship, you have to attract businesses to actually develop the economy, and that's something that Argentina hasn't been doing in the past, again, decades. So my question is, and I always ask that to the Marxists that I'm talking to, is that, yeah, your criticism of many political points is often valid, but you do not offer any solutions, because without offering solutions, you will not be able to create a flourishing society. And I also noticed that at the beginning of his speech, Gишermo mentioned that, he does not consider Lula da Silva to be a representation of the socialist politician, or Chavez to be a representation of a communist or socialist politician. That's all fair and good. But the problem is, you only say that after the politics fail. But if you look at the point of their victory, if you look at the point of them rising to power, all you see is all the left-wing media and all the left-leaning politicians around the world supporting their rise to power, even though it's obvious from the start the kind of politics that they're going to unleash onto their country. So I don't think Gишermo is being sincere when he says that Lula and Chavez are not socialist politicians, because he only says that when it becomes impossible to deny their failure. So yeah, that's my point.
Mikhail, to know if I am sincere or not, you have to Google. It's not that hard nowadays. So you can look at Prensa Obrera, which is the webpage for the Partido Obrero. You can look at En Defensa del Marxismo, which is our theoretical journal. Both have public web pages. Both have an archive dating back decades. I've been an editor and a contributor on both of these publications. And our criticism of the center-left and the nationalist governments has been a point of principle during all our history. So I'm speaking for my organization. I'm not speaking for the general leftist environment, which has, of course, parts of which have supported Syriza, Podemos, and many other social democratic and failed regimes. We are against and have been all our history against. So really, instead of saying insincere, take the time to Google.
No, again, obviously.
No. I listened to you attentively, but I just want to make that clear. On a second point, so this is important because these are differing points of view. So sometimes under a broad idea, as I said previously, of leftists, different political strategies try to be summed up. And the case of Argentina, there's a reality that you have a class-based left, which is mostly Trotskyist, at least the political organization, so it has a broad insertion in unions and in social movements and in the student movements, and has had some high electoral points. But not only do we have a representation in Congress and local legislatures, but in the class struggle. So this is a particularity of Argentine politics, which might not be the most usual occurrence in other countries, but the Partido Obrero, my organization, the Workers' Party, and the left front we are part of, has neither supported nor is related to neither the Kirchnerista governments in Argentina, nor Lula, nor Chavez, nor any of these national bourgeois governments when they came to power, when they were popular, nor when they fell out of popularity. So just to make this point clear. Now, I realize that this political debate also has the political coordinates are under discussion, because Milei's campaign and much of the far right's campaign has to do with changing the conception of the political coordinates. So this idea, for example, of that defending the right of the working class people to organize in different sort of organizations like unions, to do collective demands for the labor conditions is losing freedom. But we've heard Mikhail say that an example of freedom is Xi Jinping's China, where there's a massive labor force which does not have the right to unionize. And he said this sort of almost slave level of wages and working conditions in China is the secret to their industrialization that Argentina and other countries should imitate. Okay, so he is a supposed anarcho-capitalist or libertarian who is defending a militarized regime that does not allow political freedom. It does not allow people to freely associate in unions or any sort of organizations, and defends that these are the conditions that are necessary to industrialize. These are strange anarchists indeed, nothing to do with the currents that were revolutionary or part of the working class, or that defended freedoms against the state. In going to the center of the debate on Argentina, of course we have a solution. We have to change what has been always done. Milei defends a particular line in the Argentine bourgeoisie which has been attempted many times. Milei says falsely that 100 years ago, liberal oligarchical regimes, which were in reality semi-colonies of England and the United Kingdom, were a moment where Argentina was powerful and that we should go back to it. He likewise says Menem is a hero, Carlos Menem, the president who made foreign debt rise hugely and advanced with privatizations under the aegis of the United States and the Bush administration in the 90s. The reality is that these moments were moments that crystallized, together with other governments, the military dictatorships, which had many economical administrators that Milei defends as well, the colonial character of the Argentine reality, where the huge richness that we have is siphoned off by imperialism through foreign debt, through the presence of international companies in strategic places in our economy, through unequal commerce on an international level, through maneuvers of finance capital. So any government that wants to break the colonial chains that have been siphoning off the huge natural resources and riches of Argentina and other Latin American countries and semi-colonial countries around the world has to break the methods through which this slavery, this oppression is being carried out. The first one is to cease all payment of the foreign debt. The second is to nationalize the banking system to avoid the sort of fugue of capital outside of the country, which has been used systematically by BlackRock, by the private owners of the foreign debt who play in the markets against Argentine governments when they don't carry out what they want, as is happening right now to Havьера Milei with the dollar rising in Argentina. So BlackRock and the owners of the finance markets impose their policies on the different governments. And if you don't control the banking system under workers' control, this is going to continue to happen. The same with international commerce. The international market wants our resources, but we have to be able to discuss not only the price, but the conditions. We want the know-how. We want the investments to be able to industrialize our country. We have the riches that are leaving our country every year. What we need to do is to channel these riches into a plan of industrialization, into a plan of public works. The reality in Argentina is that much of our population does not even have decent public services, does not have access to health, education, transportation, does not have asphalt on our streets, does not have a proper sewer system, does not have housing. So it is a country of immense riches, but that is living in extreme poverty. If we put the riches that are leaving the country in foreign debt to rebuild the reality of our country, we will not only industrialize, but make a powerful inner market, inner demand that will allow the economy to grow, that will allow salaries, and that will allow jobs to be created. So this, of course, the Peronist governments have not wanted to do. We marched with thousands of unemployed workers and employed workers from the unions as well, and demanded the outgoing Alberto Fernandez government to stop the increase of poverty with a public works system to give proper living conditions to the working class neighborhoods around the Buenos-Ayres area. And the Peronist governments have followed the same old policy, paying the foreign debt, increasing austerity, and thinking that the capitalist companies, particularly the foreign companies, which make up more than 70% of the significant companies in Argentina, getting bigger profits is going to trickle down to workers. Well, that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in Russia, doesn't happen in Argentina, doesn't happen in any capitalist country. What happens is an increase in social and economic polarization, where a small group of rich people is just increasing their wealth, and where the mean of the living conditions in Argentina has not ceased its decline for over 4 decades.
Okay, so I think Gишermo gave a great example of idealistic thinking contradicting empiricism, to quote the Lenin, right? And I'm surprised I'll have to explain that to a Marxist, because you were the ones who formulated it first. So there's a. I'm not. Gишermo mentioned that Xi Jinping's China. That if I used the example of Xi Jinping China as an example of a free country, I never did that. I stressed that there was a condition of their economic rise. There were reasons why China had economic success in the past 30 years, and I offered Gишermo and the viewers of Rapcore an opportunity. Suggested to the viewers and to Gишermo to reflect upon the reasons why that economic rise happened. I did not mention once that it was a free economy or that it was a free country. I said,
but you offered it as an example that we should follow.
Yes, I offered that as an example of objective economic success. And
do you think the workers in China want to live under those wages? Do you think that is their free
yes,
choice?
I absolutely believe that workers in China today have a much better life than whatever they had 30 years ago, and that's the reality.
No, I didn't ask reality. I asked if it's their free choice to live under those wages.
Because that's a faulty question. Because you should emphasize the human development and the economic rise. And if the poorest have better off living today, if the poorest class of the society has better life today than they had 30 years ago, and in China they objectively do. That's the empirical evidence. That's the empirical reality.
So
that's what Lenin. That's what
not
Lenin.
A center of the analysis for you.
That's a different topic. That's a different
but how
topic
do you
that needs to be
individual freedoms
examined.
To work in China in regards to working class conditions?
I think the individual freedoms in China today are vastly more, are much more widely accessible, and the working class in China.
So you think there's more freedom in the labor market in China than in Argentina, for example?
Than in China 30 years ago, absolutely.
Not
a doubt, not a single.
Or that you criticized because there are unions.
No, again,
I think you're an admirer of martial law against union organization.
No. Okay, Gишermo, I gave you again an opportunity to speak freely, and I'd like to do the same. And I think there's a strong manipulation that you're doing when you're asked to compare Argentina today and China, because those are two different societies with two different socioeconomic situations with vastly different histories. And what I'm saying is that when you analyze the economic development or the human development in a country, you have to put it in the context of the reality of said country. And of course, looking at China, it's obvious that working people today in China have vastly better lives than what they had 30 years ago. That's undeniable. sorry, that's something undeniable. And Argentina can have a vastly better life in 30 years than it has today if it will face the reality, the empirical evidence of it, and reform it itself, relying on the resources that it has, and on the economic reality of its current situation. And that's, I think, what Gишermo just refuses to do. He's talking about idealistic ideas, but he refuses to face the empirical reality of things that need to be done to actually release people from their unfortunate economic condition. So yeah, then Gишermo also mentioned the unions, and I think there are different kind of unions. There are unions that freely associate workers for collective bargaining, and libertarians never had anything against that kind of unions. And there are unions that terrorize individuals and use government force against individuals who wish to engage in independent employment. And these are two vastly, even though they have similar names, those are two vastly different organizations. One is a tool of the civil society to improve the conditions of the working class. The other is a tool of the union nomenclatura, if you wish, to monopolize the market and to create class privileges for those who already has access to it, which I think has nothing to do with personal freedom, nothing to do with workers' freedom, and nothing to do with freedom of associations. That's just a branch of the government, and that's how it always been in the countries that allowed these kind of unions to exist. Case in point, unions in Soviet Russia. So yeah, and my final point of criticism is that I think Gишermo is under the delusion that economic trade is a zero-sum game. Economic trade is, when done right, economic trade benefits both parties engaged in the exchange, in exchange of labor for money, for example, or in exchange of one type of goods on other type of goods. And that's what has been, and that's what previous governments in Argentina prevented people from being engaged in. And I think that's really the root of our disagreement and the root of my disagreement with a majority of Marxists. Marxists, you know, there's a great the Groucho Marx. There was an actor and a director in early Hollywood, Groucho Marx, and he once retold the story that he had with a friend. That his communist friend asked him if he had some work for him, and he said that, you know, I don't want to exploit you, and because in the economy, the only thing worse than exploitation is not having anyone wanting to exploit you. And that's, I think, the kind of trap that this kind of idealistic Marxist thought put the society into. And that's the reason why there has been so many social failures whenever Marxist experiment has been tried, because you refuse to acknowledge that economy is not a zero-sum game, that economy and trade makes everyone better off, even if one side has an apparent advantage. Over time, this advantage will be narrowed, and the disadvantaged layer of society will rise thanks to economic development.
Okay, so a few things that I think are important to get into. What are the political conditions under which a plan like that of Javier Milei, a plan like that which Michail puts forward, a plan like that of capitalist forces that want to destroy the conditions of labor, want to destroy the levels of wages, want to destroy working conditions and stability, can be achieved. This is the central problem that the Milei government is facing in Argentina. This is the reason that 10 days after they came to power, they announced a new security protocol which stated that public demonstrations were forbidden in our country. This protocol has not been able to be carried out. Milei has not gathered, though he won an election, he does not have a mass support in the streets, nor an institutional support, and definitely not a support of working people, which makes demonstrations inexistent, nor gives him the conditions to physically destroy these demonstrations, as he would no doubt like. He does send the police regularly to demonstrations. He has now started doing espionage and police raids in the house of people who organize protests, setting up phony smear campaigns, trying to promote criminal charges against people for demonstrating against these reform plans, as you know, as you have experienced yourself with the Putin government. And as from what I heard, Mikhail himself has experienced being.
I've been in jail several times, yes.
Yeah, of course, which I am absolutely against. I don't think anybody should be in jail for their ideas. But the conditions of the Milei government that they are defending are the persecution of political dissent. And I think there is a direct link between the conditions that they want to apply to labor, both in the private and public sectors, of the destruction of public services, with the idea of persecuting the possibility of opposition, the possibility of dissent. So I think it is not I'm not pressing a random point when I see that Mikhail thinks that the capitalist accumulation in Xi Jinping's China is the one that we should model our economic development under, because what they have inherited from the Stalinist bureaucracy that you know so well in Russia is the prohibition of free political organization, the prohibition of free organization, and the prohibition of action and dissent. So even coming from a very different ideological standpoint, I understand that Mikhail probably doesn't agree with many points of the Chinese Communist Party. This point is attractive because these are the political conditions under which there is no freedom of organization, because the only chance a worker has of demanding better conditions is collective action. Of course, unions exist that are democratic and unions exist that are bureaucratized, that have been absorbed into the state. There's a strong tendency in our stage of capitalism to absorb these sort of organizations, working class organizations in their origins, into the state, and making state officers and private bosses very linked to the interests of these union leaders. The Partido Obrero has decades in Argentina of fighting for democracy in unions, of fighting for the free election of delegates against union leaders who have tried to make these working class organizations into their private property. We have comrades who have been killed, even recently in 2010, by unions and state officials defending these sort of bureaucratic unions. But I can assure you, I discuss regularly with state legislature members of so-called libertarian or liberal political groups. And when a union is not bureaucratic and through its assembly, through its free discussion, it goes on strike for wages, it goes on strike against layoffs, it discusses what wages they really need to live off and how they go to direct action to achieve this in an absolutely free and non-bureaucratic way. For example, the tire workers union in Argentina, the SUTNA, or the university professors union, the AGDUBA, which are led by our organization, carry out these methods. And you know what libertarian congressmen like Espert, a close ally of Milei, call for? Jail or bullets for these workers. So these are not real libertarians. The economic conditions that they say are favorable are not ones freely elected by workers, and are ones which these messianic leaders like Milei say they will be able to solve things if they are allowed to rule the civil society with an iron fist through police measures. This is what we are going up against in Argentina. And I want to tell Radcor viewers, and I think it will be an interesting development, tomorrow, Saturday, 25th, there will be a big assembly, not of bureaucratic leaders, not of the old Peronists and traditional parties, but of left organizations, rank and file unions, neighborhood assemblies, unemployed movements, which are under attack very strongly by the government and the legal system. And we're going to do a big assembly in the Congress Square. Tomorrow, which is Independence Day, Milei said he was going to take a picture with all the governors to announce a new political pact. That pact has fallen through because there is no public support for the kind of austerity measures he wants to carry it out. Instead of that, what we're going to have tomorrow, May 25th, is thousands of people in an assembly, in commissions, discussing how we organize a plan of action against this government. If they defeat us, which is a possibility, it will be through state repression and legal persecution. Like Putin, like Xi Jinping, like Le Pen, or would love to if she's elected to France, like Trump tried to do in the US, but was defeated in the streets by the Black Lives Matter movement. This ultra-right, they have their ideological differences, but there is a common thread. They want to destroy the capacity for working class organizations, upping up the ante and using measures of civil war against organizations of the working class and popular sector. This is the international trend that Milei is trying to bring to Argentina. This is a success story that he is selling abroad when he goes to the Davos Forum and says, all the socialists have gathered in the Davos Forum. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds absurd to call the millionaires of the world socialists, and it is. But what he is saying is, I represent a more extreme measure of reaction. That is why he is a fan of Netanyahu, who is carrying out a genocide against the Palestinian people, which Milei is so strongly supporting on an international level. It is the profound reaction of police and state apparatus against the working class, against popular sectors, and all the individuals that are contained therein. And that's why I want to make a strong emphasis that in Russia, in Argentina, or anywhere, this has nothing to do with freedom, anarchy, or libertarianism. This is a state repressive ideology.
Thank you, Gишermo. I see that Mikhail has a lot to
I have some.
So
I'm not going to take
another turn once again and then switch to questions afterwards.
Okay. I just have a quick comment. I'm not going to speak for too long. So I just want to stress again that even the union that is not bureaucratized can be a force of government oppression if they prevent and terrorize individuals from getting employment in a company. And that is the case in Argentina. That is the case in many Latin American countries, because unions effectively are political organizations that have political power. That is, their political interests are protected by the government force. So it's not, the problem is not that the unions are bureaucratized. The problem is that the unions are basically control the government force and use it to advantage their members on a class level, using Marxist terminology. Second, you mentioned Trump and the BLM movement, which again, it just goes to show the level of, manipulation that is common in a certain left-wing circles, because of course Trump today is the one who's being prosecuted and for his political views. And if we're talking about protesters, then 6th of January protesters have been sentenced for over 20 years. Some individual sentences reached 20 years of incarceration for basically taking part in a political rally for free and fair elections, which I think is absolutely is not something that society should tolerate. And the same goes for Black Lives Matter movement, which was not a protest movement. It was a movement to terrorize people into political compliance. We saw the footages from the streets in Philadelphia, the footages from Chicago, from Waukesha, etc., where private and public property were destroyed, burned, incinerated in an act of senseless violence, while police has stepped away and just watched it unfold. So again, BLM is not an example of political protest. It's an example of a campaign to terrorize and paralyze the political opposition. These are two important points that I wanted to make. Everything else I think we discussed before in one way or another.
All right.
Should I respond, or did you want to?
If you wish, or we can. No, I think Kali wanted to move forward, and I'm fine if you're fine.
Yeah.
Just on this Trump point, maybe two short things. First of all, January 6th was an attempt of a political putsch, financed by a sector of the concentrated power, like the Koch brothers, and a part of the U.S. bourgeoisie, which is of course very divided. There are sectors who support the Democratic Party.
I just have to say that Koch brothers are in opposition.
They tried to occupy the Capitol and carry out a putsch, a coup d'état. So it is very strange to consider this a peaceful rally while calling the demonstration of Black communities and many sectors in the U.S. actually the largest demonstrations, popular demonstrations in the history of the United States, a terrorist campaign. So apparently, Black people targeted systematically by the police for levels of repression that lead to their systematic murders. I don't have the figures in front of me, but this has been very extensively studied. And I have a book on the protests in the United States called "The Decline of the American Empire," which has been edited here in Argentina. And since Mihail is nearby, he can, if he swings by Buenos-Ayres, he can get a copy next time. This is very much studied and is a well-known fact. And he would want people to not demonstrate against it and let people like George Floyd and hundreds of others be murdered while they do not protest. Is this a proposal? This is a terrorist campaign, but the police that systematically murder a part of their population to be used as cheap labor and to be second-class citizens have to not organize? Well, I want to stress again, these sort of politics, these far-right politics which defend police states, I mean, they're free to give them, just don't call them anarchism. They are totalitarian, repressive policies.
Yeah, so quick answer. So people gathering freely without weapons against the government institution are taking part in the protest. That's why 6th of January is a protest. People gathering to burn private businesses, to take part in pogroms and looting are not taking part in a political protest. They are taking part in a criminal act. The proposal is to distinguish between a pogrom and a political demonstration. Quite simple.
I oppose completely your use of pogrom as a Jewish person. Pogroms happened here in Buenos Aires. Pogroms were suffered by my great-grandparents in Ukraine. They emigrated for those reasons. They were always organized by state officials and aristocrats, as the Black Hundreds under Czarist times, or the aristocrats who are now with Macri and Milei here in Argentina, who organized the pogroms against the working class neighborhoods with the immigrants, many of them Jewish immigrants, because they were socialists and anarchists. That's a pogrom. A rally against police repression is not a pogrom, and it's insulting for you to use that name. As a Jewish person, I would advise you to use some other term.
Yeah, I'm just want to make sure the kind of events that unfolded in European capitals after the start of the Israeli campaign in Palestine, where the Jewish businesses were burned, are you considering them pogroms or not?
I have seen no such news. I am against, of course, anti-Semitism. As a socialist, have fought against it all my life, and I stand strongly with the Palestinian people against genocide, as do thousands of Jews around the world, like Jews for Peace. Here in Argentina, there's also an organization, Judíos por Palestina, and who are against Zionism, which is, of course, a form of state oppression. As an anarchist, I'm sure you must know this, to build an ethno-state where only one sort of people have first-class citizenship, built upon a police dictatorship against the majority of the population that used to exist before the founding of the State of Israel. This is a historic crime, and it is a tragedy that the Jewish people who have been exterminated under the Nazi regime are used by US imperialism, by England, who used to be the imperialist power in the area, as a force, a police, to form a police state against the Palestinian people. So I'm happy that against this terrible tragedy, thousands of Jews have come out so strongly, and we see, in particular in the United States, but in many places across the world, and here in Argentina as well, against genocide, because it would be a tragedy for the Jewish people to be associated with military extermination of a people as we suffered ourselves.
Yeah, you haven't answered my question, though. I mean, I agree with you that the military campaign in Gaza has gotten out of hand and can be considered a human rights crime. So that's we don't have a point of disagreement here. But I asked if you considered the kind of pogroms that happened in the European capitals in the past, the kind of attacks that happened in European capitals in the past 6 months, pogroms or not. That the question was simple.
I'm not aware of them. Frankly, I am against attacking any individual business owner or house owner or whatever for their racial background or belonging, be them Muslim, Jew, or absolutely any attack on any people, any sort of racist attack, I oppose.
Okay, well, we can move forward.
All right, let's wrap it all and just switch to the question sections. So I have two kind of short questions to present some additional opinions on the matter for both for Mikhail and both for Gишermo. And then we'll switch to the questions from the viewers as well. Mikhail, my first question here is, well, summing up a lot of your critique today, you've mentioned multiple times, please keep me honest if that's correct understanding, that you're criticizing Javier Milei because in your point of view, he's not severe enough in his reforms and not delivering enough on what he promised. Knowing that, like, I have, like, for me, that's like a value contradiction in terms of libertarianism and liberalism. What are your points of view on some of the most unliberal reforms that he made, for example, the abortion ban?
I should have mentioned that earlier. I don't think what you call an abortion ban is a fair definition of the kind of politics that Javier Milei is enacting in Argentina. What he basically said is that he wants the local governments to decide quite in the same manner that the Supreme Court in the US decided a couple of months ago, that local governments should make a decision if the abortion should be legal or not. So all he said is that it's not up for a federal government to decide; it should be up to the local governments, which I think is very much in tune with the idea of decentralization of power that libertarians usually aspire to. So again, I think calling it an abortion ban is manipulative and is not just to the kind of politics that Milei is pursuing in Argentina.
All right, thank you so much. Let me refine my question a little bit because I sincerely cannot take the feedback on that's manipulative. We already know, and we have, like you said, empirical evidence as well, that that's a slippery slope towards more and more restrictive path towards, in the end, the ban of abortion as well. And that's what we see in the US right now. So from the points of view of libertarianism, isn't that like the personal, the individual freedom that we should just give out to the people to decide and not let it up to the government?
Yeah, again, I think that's a kind of a catch-22 problem because the kind of things that you aspire to achieve can only be reached through destruction of the system that you use to get yourself elected into power. And that's the problem that many left-wing politicians faced as well. And I think because in general, I think Gишermo is very idealistic, but I think in general, left-wing politicians are much less idealistic than libertarians, and they understand it quite well. And Lenin was the first politician who actually understand it really well. Yeah, I think the problem of Milei government is that he's not delivering on his promises, and the more time he spends traveling around the world, sort of parading himself as a champion of libertarian thought, the fewer opportunities he will have to actually achieve any measurable level of success in Argentina. Talking about the individual freedoms, I think individual freedoms, and I think Gишermo actually might agree with me on that. I think individual freedoms can only be defended if rights of the collective are defended as well. The only point of disagreement that we have is that I believe in freedom of association. I don't believe that collective should have power over individual. I think individuals should have power to form a collective. These are two very separate thoughts, which I think are important to stress. And my final point on that is that I believe that politics are much more complicated than our ideal understanding of it. It's not enough to set an objective. You have to have a roadmap of reaching it somehow, and this roadmap can very much be in contradiction with the ideal objective that you set out for yourself, because on the way to this objective, on the way of getting to a reformed state, you have to actually make the reforms happen. And you will have to realize these reforms in a hostile environment, within the system that doesn't want to change, and you'll have to go against interests of many people who will oppose you. These are two, like, roadmap and objective are two necessary conditions for political change. It's not enough to have good objectives and not have any clue how to reach them. And I think objectives of Hawvier Milei are great, but he has no idea how to get there.
If, let's say, we fix the objectives as they are now, as you agree with them, can you imagine a roadmap where the individual freedoms are not stepped on?
I believe that in order for individual freedoms to be protected, we have to first destroy the institutions that actually step on individual freedoms. And that was our point of disagreement with Gишermo, is that many of the institutions that he deems important are actually the kind of institutions that do not allow individual to be free or to flourish. And a lot of democratic institutions, or institutions that we consider democratic, are designed exactly like that. And that's why libertarians in general are not fans of democracy. One of the main books of the libertarian movement is Democracy, the God That Failed. To defend the individual, you have to acknowledge the political reality of the system and of the economic conditions of the society that you work in. If you fail to do that, you're only going to bring misery and suffering.
I see. Thank you. Well, speaking of democracy, I have actually the question to Gишermo next. So we were discussing a lot of critique to the current government of Argentina today. So I want to address
I'm sorry. Can I make one more point before you ask Gишermo? I'm sorry. It's important. I think it's the one that Gишermo will agree with me. I think one of the biggest threats to the Milei administration is that it's much easier to step on the weak than on the powerful, and it's a great seduction that power offers. That you can discard the interest of the poor, the interest of the weak, the interest of unorganized in favor of your own political ambitions or your own political power. And that's what happens all over the world. That's why so many socialist government failed, is not because they had bad objectives. Some of them did have reasonable objectives and sometimes noble ones, but because it's so much easier to step on the weak than to go against the powerful. you tend to start your reforms by stepping on the weak, by stepping on the poor, and in the end you end up being the kind of problem that you tried to solve in the beginning. And I think that's one of the biggest threats that Milei faces right now, because big corporations, and again I think Gishemro will agree with me, have the necessary resources to to offer you not bribes, but to offer you kind of support that is necessary for you to win the election, for example. They have enough money to buy you airtime on television, to send you on some fancy conferences abroad, to give you the kind of opportunities that you need to come to power or to stay in power. But they also destroy your political ambition, because at this moment it becomes easier to ignore the people than to ignore the kind of organizations or the kind of millionaires that support you. And that's the biggest, again, catch-22 of politics, unfortunately. So I can see it happening to Milei right now, actually. And that's how I explain some of the political measures that he took in Argentina. I think he sort of prioritized things that are easier for him as a politician, that in the long run will not allow him to reform the Argentina in the way that I think a libertarian should reform it.
I see.
Sorry for interrupting, and yeah.
No, I mean, we could start another discussion right now, but still, I want to switch to the topic of democracy, actually. I think that, like, as we have been discussing today, a lot of, like, some of the ideas marked idealistic. I personally, like, don't agree with that, but I can say, like, I'm not a debating person right now. I'm a host, so I'll let this skip. I would just say that, like, thinking about the future of Argentina right now, I want to ask Gishemro, so is there right now the future for social democracy in Argentina, and within the political landscape that we got now, right? We have what we have. What should be the real measures, and what should the socialist candidate in the future propose to win over the country once again?
No, I think there's no future for social democracy in Argentina. I think social democracy is a failure internationally. I think that the welfare state that was possible in central imperialist countries in the post-war era is not possible in this era of capitalist decline. I think that the capitalist system is spreading out wars, social conflicts of a sharper and sharper nature, and that the space for social democratic reforms is much narrower, even in more industrialized countries, and it is non-existent in a country like Argentina. So I really see no future for social democracy. I think there are many points that I was listening to Mikhail that are interesting. And you want to talk about the problem of democracy. As I said before, as Marxists, we do not understand political terms to be possible for them to be separated from their class basis. So in political sciences, they talk to us about the birthplace of democracy being in ancient Greece or Rome. And yes, that is the case, but that was a slave owner's democracy. In the same way, what we are living under in capitalist countries, when there is a democratic political regime, is a bourgeois democracy. And as Mikhail explained, the political power of large corporations is not the same as that of poor and working class people. This is just not true in a bourgeois democracy. So last year, we had 40 years of uninterrupted political democracy in Argentina, and the result of this bourgeois democracy in our colonial country has been a complete failure. I do not think it is along these lines that the problems will be solved, but under a workers' democracy, under a government of the majority. Now, a government of the majority will not be a unanimous government. It will have to stand up against the privileges of those few who who are profiting from the current regime. I understand this is what Mikhail objects to, but his way of putting it about was a bit abstract for my taste. For example, he does not say if he agrees or not with the police oppression and persecution of the opposition in Argentina that Milei wants to carry out, even if he has not gathered full political support for. From the very first day, banning demonstrations on the streets, recent police raids, and the proposal of the government having the right to declare martial law in any part of the country that, for example, has been recently sent to Congress. So these sort of, which has to do directly with what Mikhail was saying. He said you, this sort of literary you, like you or me or anybody else. He says, if you want reforms, many times you tend to go against the poor. Of course, this would not happen to a party like ours, because we are for the rights of the working class against the privileged few. This is our program. This is the interest that we would have to go up against, even if this meant a very strong fight, a revolution, a change of political regime, to go against concentrated monopolies that are the ones robbing the riches of our country. This is our program. So when he says there's a very hostile environment, and what does this mean? Is it correct to jail workers who are demonstrating against this reform? Is it correct for state espionage to put up trumped up cases against social movements? We are against this. We think this is repressive. We think this is unacceptable. And this is what Milei is carrying out. He is not only, it is true, he is not carrying out the program he campaigned on, where he said immediate dollarization, we will blow up the central bank. He is emitting pesos like all the other governments did before him. So he is maintaining a liberal form of the same bourgeois economic policies the other ones did, and it's no regime change, there's no big system change like he talked about, which was pure verbiage. But to make it concrete and not abstract, if Mikhail says I'm being idealistic, what are the interests that a government can defend of poor people if they are using the police to jail them? On the problem of individual freedom as well, it's an important one. It is not true that Milei is for local rule to decide abortion. Milei sided with the churches, both the evangelical and Catholic churches, against the free abortion movement, which was massive in Argentina, and which undoubtedly was the majority of women, and particularly young women, those in reproductive moment of their life, were in favor of being able to decide if they wanted to carry out an abortion or not, for it not to be the state's decision or the church's decision, but for them to have the right to access this freedom. This was very hard won over many years of organization and demonstration of the women's movement in Argentina and of many who supported it. And at that moment, so-called libertarians were part of the so-called pro-life movement, which favors the state forbidding access to legal abortion under proper conditions, which does not end with abortion, but what it does is force it into clandestine measures, which frequently end with health problems and even death for the women who choose to carry it out. So in this case, again, they were part of a movement called Pañuelo Celeste, the light blue handkerchief, which identified the pro-life movement in Argentina. One of a very close associate of Milei presented a bill proposing a direct ban, not like Mikhail said, and they pulled it out of Congress only because they understood that the government is having so many political problems that to start up women's demonstrations for abortion rights was a political suicide. But their political position is, as Trump's, for example, in the US and many others in the ultra-right, against women's right to choose on abortion rights.
Okay. Do I need to answer? Sorry, I thought it was a different kind of interaction right now, but I can.
I mean, you can answer. I think that by now, like, the only common ground we have is like whether reforms are successful or not. Like, you will be stepped on, whether you are a woman or a child or a worker or anybody else.
Well, okay, I'm going to leave my comment then. So it all rests in the definition of working class, and I think that Marx's definition of working class and Gишermo's definition of working class is lacking, and to be fair, is not indicative of the working people, how we understand them today. That's my first point. And the second point, I agree that there is no regime change happening in Argentina. I agree that it very much makes Havьером Милеем a populist and not a libertarian. But that's something I opened our debate with. That's the point that I made, and I agree with that. Finally, just to explain the libertarian thought a little bit, in libertarianism we have this idea of a sanction of aggressor. That basically means that whatever means that person deems possible to use. Whatever force a person deems possible to use against you, you're allowed to use against that person as a retaliation. So if a person, for example, believes that government force can be used to redistribute individual property, for example, then the force can be used against that person because the sanction had been received to prevent that person from coming to power, for example. So people are not being jailed for their character or class or anything else. They are being prosecuted for their actions. If you need to understand the libertarian motivation behind certain actions. So there is inherent contradiction of a libertarian politician being the head of the non-libertarian government, because government by definition cannot be libertarian. But that definition is amended by the concept of sanction of aggressor. Basically, we'll have to if an enemy or a person believes that government force can be used, or force can be used to coerce someone into subjecting you to his will, then the same power can be used to prevent that person from subjugating you.
All right. Well, we actually have a lot of questions from the viewers, some of them touching upon the ideological grounds as well. So we'll have a lot of opportunities to answer that. And let's move on to this part, I guess. I'll be reading out loud some of the questions. Some of them are directed to Gишермо or to Mikhail, some are not. So feel free to pick them and answer the ones you like. We have a lot, so perhaps we should keep it a little bit on the briefer side. So the first question is Red Small is asking, are cryptocurrencies used in Latin America for an ordinary non-criminal payments? Why is no cryptocurrency still used for project lending, long-term infrastructure, manufacture real projects, not investment scam, only as a speculative instrument and a tool for personal risky loans?
Is that question for Gишermo or to me?
It's not personalized. Do you want to take it?
Yeah, I don't think all use of cryptocurrency is criminal at all. It does not have necessarily as much widespread use in different economic functions as this person is asking, but it exists and is not criminally charged. The problem we have in Argentina, and I think this has to do with it, as Michail said, being a populist government and not a libertarian one, is that, for example, Milei has upheld the state control over exchange of currencies, in particular the peso to the dollar. So cryptocurrency is one way that many people are using to try to sidestep state control of the possibility of changing pesos to dollar in an economy that is basically dollarized and with a very high inflation. So it is one of the ways people are trying to sidestep these destruction of wages in pesos in a dollarized economy which is a feature that Milei has maintained from previous governments. And maybe Mikhail agrees with this, because about an hour and a half into this debate on whether Milei's reforms are positive or not, apparently at least we agree that they are destroying and stepping on Argentine working class and poor people, as he has in some ways.
No, I didn't say that it's already.
You said you step on the poorest and weakest people. So this is what's happening in Argentina, and he's maintaining these features from so-called left-wing governments that you referred to earlier.
Yeah, I just want to correct that. I didn't say that it's already happening. I said that that's what tends to happen when you get into power.
It's happening. 3 million new poor people, 100,000 layoffs. It's not going well.
Oh.
All right, we have another question here. So, anarchism and capitalism. Name at least one ideological principle that could unite them. Thank you.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, just so.
Can we come up with any ideological grounds that would unite anarchism and capitalism?
Yeah, well, there are plenty of books written about it, obviously. But I think it depends again on your definition of anarchism. And I think anarcho-capitalism is somewhat of a misnomer, because what actually libertarians are trying to achieve is to create the right-based society, which is the opposite of anarchism. And I'm using anarchism in the Hobbesian sense as a war of all against all. I think that the only escape from war of all against all is actually into a right-based society based on the social contract, and the only form of social contract that is actually defendable from the rights-based perspective is the non-aggression contract of non-aggression, or non-aggression principle. You can call it whatever you like, but without first surrendering the threat of using violence against those who disagree against those you are disagreeing with. There's no the movement towards a more complicated negotiations. So I think anarcho-capitalism is a misnomer, but I strongly suggest not to use the word anarchy in its classical sense when talking about libertarianism.
All right. So there is a lot of questions, actually. So here is a tricky one. Can the decisions of the president, Javier Milei, be considered dictatorial based on the fact that the opposition has a majority of seats in the Argentine National Congress?
Gишermo?
Well, for example, one of the ways that Javier Milei tried to carry out legal changes is a decree. And though decrees, which are in themselves a pretty anti-democratic measure, exist in the Argentine constitution, they exist on the grounds that there is an urgent need to carry them out, which would make the president have the right to make a decision by decree without having to go through Congress. As soon as Milei came to power, he wrote a decree which changed or tried to change all economic measures, labor conditions, over 300 laws by decree. Now, which is in itself an authoritarian measure, and even many legal courts have contested the legality of this, and it has to be confirmed by Congress. And for example, the Senate has already voted against confirming turning these decrees into laws. Another of the bills he tried to get passed in Congress would have effectively suspended Congress, giving him extraordinary personal powers for economic measures and legal reforms if it had been passed. And there's, as I mentioned, a new law on security that would give him the right to decree martial law in areas of the country without having to go through Congress. So he does not have a majority in Congress. He has a very minority representation. He has no governors. He has no mayors. But what he's trying to do is to amass personal power in something that would be akin to a civil dictatorship like, for example, existed with Fujimori in Peru in the 90s, here in Latin America, or in other countries. Getting in through elections, but actually being a sort of civil dictatorship. Though this is what Milei would have wanted, he has not been able to get legal support, neither in Congress nor in justice system for this. And I think what this is showing is that the Argentine bourgeoisie is very divided. It does not agree with giving personal power to Javier Milei, even if it does agree with advancing against workers with labor reforms and privatizations and some of the points that are in his program. They don't trust him. He's too much of an outsider and an adventurer for them to give him this sort of role of a dictator that he aspires to.
Can I just make a quick comment on that? Yeah, I think it's fascinating that Gishермо uses mayors and opposition to Javier Milei that do not allow him to move forward his election promises. He kind of, when he talks about it, he kind of legitimizes the exact institute he himself believes to be corrupt and anti-working class, etc., which again is the same catch-22 problem that Milei faces. Actually, is you cannot reform the system from within without breaking the system, and Gishермо is kind of in the same boat as Milei is, because he himself, when talking about opposing Milei, is forced to legitimize in his speech the exact institutes that he opposes. Because if those institutes are not legitimate in the eyes of Gishермо, that surely there's nothing wrong with Milei going against them and going against the processes and establishing himself above them if they are not legitimate.
No. Being critical of bourgeois democracy does not make one favorable to the personal dictatorships of any would-be dictator. That's a fallacy.
Is bourgeois
democracy? Yeah. You talked about Lenin. And both Lenin and Trotsky had a lot of writings. That's why they sided with Kerensky against Kornilov, and then they took power against Kerensky. But it was clear to the Bolsheviks in 1917 that a military dictatorship of Kornilov would not have been favorable conditions for the working class, and they were absolutely right to, as they said it, put their rifle on the shoulder of Kerensky against Kornilov. So yeah, we do not agree with bourgeois opposition to democracy, and we would not want a personal dictatorship of Javier Milei against the working class people of Argentina. There's no contradiction there. We understand this is a division in the ruling class that we oppose, and we understand that a dictatorship would be a tragedy for the Argentine people.
Yeah, just to establish themselves and to use the same rifle against Kerensky after defeating Kornilov. And that's exactly the point I'm making. The reason the Lenin, and that's the reason I brought up Lenin, is that Lenin understood really well the difference between idealism and empirical approach. And that's exactly what Milei does not understand, and why I constantly remind libertarians that you need to actually learn from the left wing, because left wing understand empiricism much better, which is, in my opinion, is something Gishермо emphasized really well in his response, that yes, they will side with bourgeois democracy when it's opportune to their goals, but they will never hesitate to use oppressive means once they have the opportunity, once they find themselves in the place of Javier Milei.
Well, it's a different place, because the place of the majority means defending the working class and defending the working majority and not their oppressors. I will give you an example on the unions. You spoke on free unions. We had a whole debate on that. Here in Argentina, for example, there were many railway workers who were outside of union contracts. Now, contrary to the scheme that you formed idealistically, what they wanted was to have a union contract, and they weren't able to. Why? Because for the same tasks that they were carrying out as members of a fraudulent cooperative, it didn't really exist a cooperative. It existed as a way to not pay them the full wage. They said, for the same job we were already doing, we would get paid double if we would be recognized with union contracts. They started a collective. How do you say this? A collective demand for this.
Collective bargaining.
By the Peronist government and the Peronist unions through hitmen who fired with guns against these workers and murdered my party comrade, Mariano Ferreira, for a free union demand. Now, libertarians do not side with unions who demand this. They side with the bosses and the governments against workers who freely organize and demand. At least that's what happens in Argentina. Not only Milei, Espert, this minister Bullrich, they're all the traditional right-wing aristocrats who side with the police and the bosses against workers whenever they freely demand their working conditions, and what do workers demand? The best possible contract in wages and working conditions they can get for their money. They don't want to have less rights. They want to have stability. They don't want bosses to be able to fire them without paying the maximum economic price for it. They want good labor conditions. They want to be able to send their kids to school. They want to be able to make ends meet. This is what workers collectively demand, and this is why it is a complete idealistic abstraction to think that there are workers who would prefer lesser working conditions or lesser wages than those that exist in union contracts. The concrete reality in Argentina is that we have paid with lives and with blood the freedom to associate and to demand for better working class conditions, and have not seen any of these bourgeois libertarians side with workers on any of these points. And Milei, quite to the contrary, is trying to promote more repressive policies, more police presence against workers who are demanding against starvation. Right now, the province of Misiones, which is in the northeast of the country, bordering with Paraguay and Brazil, so nearer to where Michail is right now, teachers, state workers, even policemen are rioting because they say we cannot live on the poverty wages that both the Milei government and the local governor is enforcing on them. What is the Milei government doing as a response? They're sending in the National Guard to repress the demonstrators. Last night, they were repressed. So this is going to be the picture of Argentina moving forward. An attempt of a police state against workers that are demanding proper wages. There's nothing free and there's nothing libertarian or anarchistic about any of it.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize again that interests of union members do not equate to workers' interests. And we know for a fact that there are millions of people who would prefer lesser working conditions to not having opportunity to work at all, which is basically the situation they find themselves in when the unions have access to oppressive force, when they have the government on their side. So that's the point.
The government is against the people's demands. It's not with the workers. Both in this example I gave you in 2010 of the railway workers, and last night in Misiones. It's not led by the unions. It's rank and file teachers who are saying, we are living in poverty wages. We do not accept this. We demand higher wages. They're not defending any union privileges. No, they are defending that they want higher wages.
Okay,
and
you obviously...
that Milei's policies is keeping them under the poverty line. And that, for example, I saw yesterday, a woman saying, I've worked as a history teacher or a literature teacher for 22 years, and I'm making half of the level of the poverty line. This is why I'm striking, and this is why I'm demonstrating against the government. It has nothing to do with any union privilege. What they want is wages which they can make ends meet and feed their families with.
Okay, so Milei policies are not holding them under the poverty line because Milei has only been in power for 6 months and they've been living below the poverty line for the, again, last several decades. So that's just squarely not true. Yeah, and that's exactly how much inflation you had in the year before that and the year before that.
No, we have 300% in the full year. 6 months Milei, 6 months Alberto Fernandez.
Fantastic.
Okay.
In 2019, the inflation was 150%. So again, inflation is not the problem that started with Milei administration. That's just blatantly not true. But to finish that point, there are plenty of work. There are plenty of work. There are plenty of employments that require you to be unionized in Argentina. And that's exactly what I mean by saying that the unions have government force on their side.
It's not mandatory in Argentina. I'm sorry, Mikhail, you're saying something that's untrue.
Okay.
There's no work in the whole country that you're required to join a union.
Is it possible to be a school teacher in the school in Buenos-Ayres if you're not unionized?
Of course.
Okay. Then
there's a free system where you just sign up and and it's a point-based system. So it's a pretty transparent and democratic one.
What does it mean? What do you mean by
your
point-based
degree is,
system?
and you sign up to be a teacher.
What do you mean by no? So where do you? Okay, I don't want to argue on Argentinian domestic politics. Obviously, I know it worse than you do, so I try to extrapolate some other experiences that I had in other countries, because there are plenty of countries where unions have that power, where you have to be unionized to be employed in a certain field, or unions have enough of leverage to prevent people from getting employed, like some kind of licensing. Unions in many countries, they have access to licensing, where without receiving a certain license, you can't be employed in a certain field, which, in my opinion, is detrimental to workers' right. And that's why I'm saying that rights of the union members and rights of the working class are two separate things.
Okay, that's not the case in Argentina, and I think it's important to point out that what Milei is doing goes up against all workers, be they union members or not. And of course, to reiterate, because some time has gone by in the debate, and maybe some people are not watching the whole thing. I never said inflation or poverty started with Milei. I very clearly stated that it was decades long of bourgeois governments that have led to this economic disaster. But it is clear that the policies and solutions that he is promoting are making things worse, not better. It's a jump forward in all terms. Inflation, devaluation, poverty, unemployment have all risen strongly in the 6 months. And not only is this true, but it is expressly what Milei has defended as a policy. He said, we are doing the blender. We're putting wages through the blender, destroying them through inflation as a way to make labor in Argentina cheaper. He has expressly said this is what he's trying to do and effectively carrying out.
We actually have a very, very similar question here from the viewers, and I wanted just to hop on it so that it would be more of a guided discussion here. So the viewers ask, do current conditions make public more open towards socialist ideas? Do workers understand their class interests in Argentina? What industry gathered the most labor at the current time?
Okay, so these several different questions.
That's actually the last non-targeted question. Others we have.
Okay. Let's go for that. I think that there has been a strong campaign to identify the left, even sectors such as the Workers' Party and the Left Front, which have been in opposition of Kirchnerismo, and to try to equate them with the Kirchnerista government and the so-called pink tide of Latin America. And I think that this has favored the right wing to be able to have won an election against the Peronist government of Alberto Fernandez, which was an absolute unmitigated disaster. Only rivaled now by the situation we are starting to live under Milei. This, which favored them, I think it's very possible that we see in Argentina are sharp turns in one direction and the other. I think both in Latin America and in other countries, we are seeing that the capitalist crisis makes for very unstable governments, and where few presidents either reach the final length of their term, and fewer still are able to get reelected or get a government of their own sign reelected. So we're seeing very sharp turns to the left and to the right. And what we are starting to see in Argentina, more than at this moment, a political turn of public support for left leaders, though this may come about, is a very strong increase in social conflict. For example, the student movement that had been dormant for several years, and many people had noted the amount of young people favoring Milei or favoring right-wing politics, has taken a sharp turn in the opposite direction when the Milei government attacked the financing of public education and started talking about private universities being better, attacking public universities, and concretely almost forcing them to close down through lack of financing. We've seen the student demonstrations erupt again, where particularly left forces are strong, and a demonstration of 1 million people in defense of public universities. We are seeing important strikes of workers in different sectors, and in particular, the rebellion of one province in the case of Misiones. We are seeing strong clashes of unemployed workers' organizations who do not accept the complete cutoff of social welfare and the delivery of food to over 45,000 popular soup kitchens that were feeding poor people and that the Milei government has cut off. So I think what we are seeing, and we'll probably see more of, is a very sharp crescendo of social clashes. And I think that the revolutionary left, which exists in Argentina, which has strong organization in all these social sectors, is starting to grow and will probably grow even further in the upcoming months. We will see if this diagnosis is true or not. We can follow up the debates a few months from now and see if my prognosis is true or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure we need to follow, because I actually agree with the key point that you made. It's that there will be sharp turns in opposing sides in Argentina, which I think is true, because people are tired of the status quo, and there is a systemic crisis in Argentina. And the only way out of a systemic crisis is a systemic reform, which unfortunately is not happening under Milei. So we don't have a disagreement there. On a political level, I agree that the only way out of a systemic crisis is a deep-rooted reform, which can only be done through not respecting the rules of the system. And whoever does that first will prevail. And my hope is that it's not going to be another socialist experiment, because we've all seen how it turns out in countries in Latin America. Because, again, one of the key questions that you haven't answered in this debate, which I think is very telling, is that you do not have you have criticism to the current problems, but you're not offering any solutions to the lack of the economic development, because to spark the economic development, you have to rely on some of your how do you say that, on some of the benefits that your economy can offer, on some of the strong, like the, yeah.
May I?
Yeah, go on.
Because if you rewatch our debate, maybe you're going to catch it later. I can go through it again, but I think either you misheard me or something happened, because I outlined a very clear economic program that we were proposing for Argentina, which you may not agree with. Maybe you think Argentina should go on paying foreign debt as it has been for decades, which have destroyed the finances of the country. You can defend the monopoly of the foreign companies on our banking system and on our strategic trade. I understand that we can have this difference, but I definitely outlined what I think a solution would be to stop imperialist looting of the resources of our country, and to channel these riches that are being taken out, particularly, but not only, through foreign debt and through the transference of utilities to the main companies of the 70% of international companies that dominate the economic life of Argentina, and for this to be under control of a workers' government and the working class, to institute a reconstruction of a country that has been sacked by imperialist domination. So I have made this proposal. I've outlined what this would mean in terms of finances, of commerce, and of a plan for reconstituting the country and making jobs. This is our proposal. And I will add something else to this. Argentina does not face this problem alone. It is even relatively more industrialized than some of its neighbors, not Brazil, but other of the neighboring countries, which have similar situations of very high indebtedness and very high control of our economies through imperialist capital, particularly US and European. So I think that in the socialist unity of Latin America, we have not only the possibility of an economic solution, but of a new geopolitical pole opening up, which could fight for a space of autonomy that does not exist in today's world.
Yeah, I'll give you that you really did mention that earlier, and I didn't address that because, to be fair, the idea of not paying the foreign debt in the empirical sense of politics sounds really ludicrous because it has already been tried in many cases, in Venezuela, in Cuba, in North Korea, and it brings about a disaster because not a single country can exist in the not a single country can flourish without access to foreign market, and that's what you basically cut yourself off from when you propose things like that. Again, it may sound great on the idealistical level, hey, let's not be exploited by this foreign capital, but in practice it will bring about the disaster, and it's just so very much obvious that I'm fascinated that it's still being discussed, to be honest.
Oh, you know what's fascinating to me, Mikhail? This idea of cutting yourself off from public investment and so on by a revolution. You thought it was a great idea when in China, after years of independent development, you think it's a success story. So in 1949, the Chinese Revolution cut all ties with international capital, as the Cuban Revolution did, as the Russian Revolution did. I obviously think many things were done wrong. I obviously think the bureaucracy and the roads to capitalist restoration, inequality, and the lack of political freedom, just to give it strong headlines, we as Trotskyists have been critical of all this process for many years. But undoubtedly, there's some aspect of economic viability possible outside of the mandate of the IMF, the US, and the European Union. And if not, China would have ceased to exist many years ago, don't you think?
No, I actually think the opposite, because at the time when China cut off all ties with the rest of the world, it brought about the worst economic crisis and hunger in the human history. More than 10 million people died. More than 20 million people died from the hunger during that period. The only time when China was actually managed to bring about the economic development is when it actually returned to the family of countries, when it allowed the foreign investment, when it guaranteed that the investment that will be made into the country will not be nationalized or forced to stay in China by the government. So
conditions are actually very far from the reality of China right now. You're more of a publicist of Xi Jinping than I would have imagined. I think there's a very strong level of intervention of the state in private companies in China.
Of course it is. Of course it is. I'm not. I didn't say.
And the level of wages in China are below the poverty line, and a very high percentage of workers. I've heard today from libertarians a level of enthusiasm for the social realities of China that are actually very far. But even that,
these are two different.
The state of China did not collapse because it broke with foreign capital.
Yes, of course it did. The Great Leap Forward, and the period of Maoist economic reforms is a disaster. It isn't discussed by anyone.
As was the campaign against the kulaks by Stalin, of course. But that being the case, the idea that an economic reality cannot exist outside that of international finance capital is just accepting the status quo as something that cannot be historically modified. And this sort of idea that no transformation is possible, this defeatism, can sound like it's real or realistic or pragmatic, but history shows that no system has lasted forever, and capitalism is showing every day with the amount of militarization, wars, and social catastrophes that it generates, that and of course environmental disasters that it generates as well, is that there's no path forward through this very sick, very diseased system. And that is why thousands of young people all around the world are looking for critical ideas. And the reality is that Marxism, socialism is the only scientific way to carry out this criticism of capitalism that comes as a second nature to workers and young people around the world that just don't want to live under these catastrophic conditions.
Well, I just have to reiterate my point is that it's not enough to question the authority and question the power and criticize the power. You have to provide the viable path of moving forward. And that's unfortunately what you fail to do, because, yeah, of course, capitalism is in crisis and it goes from crisis to crisis to crisis. But whatever you're offering with this hyper juche, North Korean style juche isolationism is not the answer to the capitalist problems. It's just the worst kind of problem imaginable. And again, it has been tried and always failed, and failed to a much bigger degree than whatever failures capitalism experiences. That's my point.
The catastrophe of the world and world wars is on capitalism, and the socialist unity of Latin America would not be North Korean isolationism. It's something else that we are proposing, and it's a collective project which we strive to make a reality for millions who need to change history. And we think history can be changed, and we think there's no reason to give up and to stop fighting for historic change when reality is unacceptable. And we are happy to see thousands, like in the encampments in the US and in Europe, like in social and popular uprisings around the world, at least see that this system is diseased and we need something else. And we have to bring a solution and a proposal to the table. That is absolutely what we strive for.
All right. Yeah, I just want to wrap it up. I didn't want to interrupt you because I think that sort of debate is actually like bringing in a lot of value for everybody. We still have a lot of targeted questions for both of you. So let's go real quick through them, and let's keep it like up to 1 minute with just like no debate. It's like targeted. You have a chance to present your position, reiterate it once again as you wish, but let's keep it like in a brief way. So a question to Mikhail. Is Milei doing the right thing by destroying the Argentine bureaucracy while at the same time obeying the advice of the IMF and the US? Somehow not anarchist.
Yeah, Milei is definitely not anarchist. And I think the reason why he pays attention to the international institutions is because Argentina is in such a precarious position right now that it requires foreign funds to develop its own potential. And that's one of the major points of disagreements that I and Gишermo have, is that in order for you to flourish, you need to let your partners or someone else to flourish as well and to benefit from your work as well. That's how economy works. Economy is not a zero-sum game. And that's why he has such different standards to big players on the outside of Argentina and to the actors within Argentina, because actors within Argentina right now serve as an obstacle to flourishment of Argentina rather than the opportunity.
Amazing, thank you. A question to Gишermo. How will Gишermo evaluate the prospect of Chile in the light of the Western plans for exploiting its resources to fuel the energy?
The prospect of?
Chile.
Of Chile?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. The prospects of Chile in the light of the Western plans for exploiting its resources to fuel the energy transition. Is it essentially cursed because of its resource abundance?
Okay, so I think both in Chile and Argentina and Bolivia and several of our countries, the presence of oil, of natural gas, of lithium, and of many of these strategic resources. Actually, Mikhail said something that is true. He said these resources are strategic depending on the industrial and economic capacity of what you do with them. So the reality of our countries is that we are very rich in natural resources, but if we are purely a seller of commodities on the international market, we have centuries of experience that the only place that capitalism reserves for us under this capacity is that of semi-colonial countries dominated by industrialized imperialist ones and with very low levels of economic and social development. So this is the situation as well in Chile. The Chilean Patagonia and Argentine Patagonia are very close by. On the Argentine side, for example, Chevron has agreed with the Peronist government, not with Milei, a special tax system specifically for Chevron to be able to get oil resources out of our country. As Nestor Kirchner, no socialist, agreed with Barrick Gold and many of the mining companies. What Milei wants is to try to generalize these sort of systems for all large-scale investments in our country. So Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, we face the same challenge. If we do not unite and try to use these natural resources for development in our region, we are condemned to be the serfs of the international capitalist system.
Thank you. Thank you. Great points. All right. Question to Mikhail. Mikhail, I can say you have attracted real complex questions. I don't know if it's our viewer base or it's yours. I will try to translate it. So when will libertarians stop using game theory to gaslight and will start learning mathematics instead? And the second question is also on mathematics, but it's another user. Does Mikhail know that when optimizing, sometimes they deliberately add disturbance to signals in order to achieve a better optimum? What does libertarian mathematics say to this?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the second question. I'm sorry. Maybe Gишермо will try to explain to me what the person asking is actually asking. And I'm not sure about the game theory question as well. I mean, the game theory describes human behavior. When person is faced with a certain dilemma under certain conditions, that's how the person will behave, because we're all economical creatures, and we all try to maximize our own opportunity when faced with a zero-sum situation. That's why the objective of a politician is to create such conditions where people are forced into mutually beneficial cooperation instead of zero-sum conflict, and that's the problem that I think that's the problem that every libertarian politician tries to solve, and that's what I wish every other politicians of every other background tries to solve as well. Because ignoring a reality of a game theory dilemmas that a game theory poses, it is not possible to achieve an optimal result.
Yeah, I think we should, like, as a takeaway, we should start hiring more mathematics to the government.
Mathematicians, yeah.
Well, actually, I think the second question refers to not the game theory itself, but there is another theory that addresses setting and achieving the goals. This is optimization theory. It's like the part in machine learning. It has nothing to do with game theory, and it's about like optimizing within some agents as well, like behaving differently. How do you achieving like the optimum on the maximum landscape where you can get it?
Yeah,
like,
but okay, I got you saying, but that's again that has to bring us back to game theory, because you can only reach an optimal result by adjusting the conditions under which people formulate their opinions and make their decisions. Because if you pit themselves against each other in the zero-sum situation, they will always be fighting each other. They will always reach rational equilibrium and not the optimal equilibrium. So again, the main objective that every politician has to set for himself is to create such an environment where a rational decision is also an optimal decision, or at least where the rational decision is as close to the optimal decision as possible. It's not enough to postulate, hey, optimal decision is good. Everyone understands that. Nobody is gonna argue that being rich is better than being poor. That having working class, having higher wages is good and not bad. Everyone is gonna agree on that. Everyone is going to agree on that, but unless you have an understanding how to get rid of the game theory dilemma, how to get rid of the situation where a rational decision is different from the optimal decision, you will never reach that objective. That's my main argument.
Yeah, I think the optimization theory has like very different point of view on this, and I just propose for the authors of the questions in general to go into detail in the comments, so we would like read it through as well. All right, a short question to Gишermo. What are your scientific interests, and if you have any scientific papers or books, where can we read them?
Oh, I am a history professor, so that is what I have studied in the University of Buenos-Ayres, and I have also written many articles on different international questions, which have political, economic, and social content. Most of them can be read in endefensadelmarxismo.com or in prensaobrera.com, which are the two journals most directly associated with my party, and which we can maybe post in the comments. And I have also some publications by independent publishing presses, like the book that I commented on the United States, which talks about class struggle through the Trump and Biden years, which has come out in Argentina from an editorial house called Milena Cacerola. But there's no international launch of it as of yet. So, but maybe that'll be a next step. But to get a first idea, I think on the En Defensa del Marxismo, In Defense of Marxism magazine, you have a pretty good presentation of different articles that I've written over the years.
Amazing, thank you. All right, so last question to Mikhail. Is it an aggressive power move from the point of from the point of view of those in power, if they don't pay a worker for their working day, or they fire them if they are participating in the protest? And if yes, is it also legal for the workers to participate and block the roads?
Okay, the question of blocking the roads should be up to the local governments and not the federal government. That's the important point. And definitely not up to the capitalists, right? So by using your own wording. So the question of the form of which protests can take is the question that should be solved on the local level and not on the federal level. As to the power to protest, or the right to protest, I think the employer has no right to prevent people from protesting, but also the protesters have no right to prevent the company from employing someone else while you're protesting. So these are two things that are in conflict with each other. Yeah.
All right. I think that was the last one. On the we have a lot in the comments as well, but it would take us hours if we go further and further. So on my side, I just want to thank you both for such a profound debate today. I think we have a really prolific discussion, and we have discussed actually a lot of very important aspects for the Argentinian past and the future. I want to thank you for that. We still have a lot of questions in the comments, and we also have some sort of voting, as I see here in the in the stream. So you are both actually very, very close in terms of our voting, and this is actually taking into consideration we have a left-leaning viewer base, to say the least. So thank you both. for the participation today in let's do what we should do, and like let's build the future for our countries. And I know that Gishермо should go right now, and we have seen some of the sounds of protests, even like when you were sitting here.
Oh no, those are just the usual sounds in
Oh my God, that's the
in
usual
Argentina.
sounds.
Yeah.
Let's
Sorry about
not
that, but
take that
it
for
wasn't the
granted.
sound of
That's not
protest. That
usual
was
sounds.
some
Let's
vendor
never
or
treat it as
something.
usual sounds. And
Yes,
let's build
Latin
a
America is different.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gishерmo. It was a pleasure talking to you, and thanks to the team of RapCore for organizing the debate, and for everyone who watched it. Thank you very much.
Yes, likewise. Very interesting debate. Thank you for Mihail. Thank you to Mihail and to the team at RapCore and all the viewers. And I don't know who was on the home turf, because I have probably less Russians who know me previously. So if it's an even vote, I think it's a good first outing. And thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.